Counseling and the Helping Relationships, Part 1. The 2005 ACA Code of Ethics stipulates that there must be specific empirical research or a theory based foundation for the use of any technique or treatment modality. This does not mean that the technique or modality has been supported by a true experiment with random selection of subjects, since that would exclude a host of valuable strategies. Okay, so the modality doesn't have to necessarily have an experiment because, as we know, there was multiple theorists who used their children as the informal experiment. Like Piaget used his children, and then I want to say it was Erickson also used his children. So that wouldn't be a viable strategy, or there wouldn't be a formal experiment, but there must be scientific imperial research or a theory-based foundation. The 2005 ACA Code of Ethics is related to all theories of counseling and the helping relationship. An example of an unproven approach is conversion or reparative therapy. It was conversion or reparative therapy intended to convert those in the LGBTQ community to heterosexuality. Consultation is extremely important. Counselors are urged to turn to resources such as the ACA website, textbooks, professional journals, and newsletters, attend workshops, and keep in contact with the persons who can act as consultants. Consultations can also apply to speaking with the patients, with a patient's physician, psychiatrist, etc. So consultations can be outside of your network in your business or your facility. Eclectic or integrative counseling is ideas from two or more different theories. So it's integrating ideas from two or more different theories. Is most used and most preferred. Almost 40% of counselors consider themselves eclectic or integrative. Frederick Thorne felt that true eclecticism was much more than a hodgepodge of facts. It needed to be scientific and preferred the term psychological case handling rather than psychotherapy, as he felt the efficacy of psychotherapy had not been scientifically demonstrated. Core dimensions are isolated factors associated with positive therapeutic outcomes and distinct qualities. So, the core dimensions are isolated factors that have already been associated or proven to be associated with positive therapeutic outcomes and distinct qualities. An effective counselor is authentic and genuine, gives positive regard through acceptance, and has accurate empathetic understanding. So the theories we have are the psychoanalysis or psychodynamic, those are used interchangeably, behavioral, cognitive, humanistic, and holistic. So psychoanalysis slash psychodynamic was created by Sigmund Freud. It is the oldest major form of therapy. Behavioral therapy or theory that can be broken into multiple different segments. We have Ivan Pavlov, which is classical or respondent conditioning. B.F. Skinner, who is operant or instrumental conditioning, and then DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, also falls under behavioral as it is product oriented. DBT is product oriented. And we know the founder of DBT is Marsha M. Lineham, and mindfulness is very heavy in DBT. The next one is cognitive. That would be Aaron Beck in CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. Albert Ellis, and Art, who is the founder of REBT, rational emotive behavior therapy, and Bernay, which is transactional analysis. Humanistic, we have Carl Rogers, who founded non-directive, which was then changed to client-centered and then person-centered therapy. We have Fitz Pearls, which is just thought, and then we have extensionalism, which falls under humanistic. And then the last one we have is a holistic or integrative approach. Traditional counseling versus crisis counseling. Traditional counseling attempts to deal with issues that go well beyond factors surrounding a crisis. Defined, counseling is a professional relationship that empowers diverse individuals, families, and groups to accomplish mental health, wellness, education, and career goals. So, defined, counseling is a professional relationship that empowers diverse individuals, families, and groups to accomplish mental health, wellness, education, and career goals. Crisis, crisis counseling goal is to return the person to their original level of functioning prior to the tragedy or crisis. The symptoms are a direct result of the crisis. So, by crisis, someone who has experienced a flood or like Hurricane Katrina, they may need crisis counseling because it's specifically due to that um, abnormal event or catastrophic event. So, Sigmund Freud is the father of psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is both a form of treatment and a comprehensive personality theory. Psychoanalysis is the oldest major form of therapy. Inborn is based off of inborn drives, mainly sex, health. Psychoanalysis believes that inborn drives, mainly sex, help form the personality. Catharsis can also be known as abreaction, abreaction. Catharsis, also known as abreaction, is the talking cure. It was taught to Freud by Joseph Breuer, Breuer. So Joseph Breuer, a Viennese neurologist, talking about difficulties. Catharsis is talking about difficulties in order to purge emotions and feelings. It's the mild form of purging. Abreaction is also when the repressed emotional outburst is very powerful and violent, and previously used to describe highly charged repressed emotions which were released during the hypnotic hypnotic process. So Freud worked with Joseph Breuer, and through Joseph taught taught Freud that the cure to mental illness is talking, which they labeled as catharsis. That is the mild form of purging. Now, when someone has an emotional outburst that's very powerful and violent, that would be abreaction. Alfred Adler, who's our individual therapy, and Carl Jung, whose analytic psychology, originally worked with Freud and can be associated with the analytic movement. That's Alfred Adler, individual therapy, and Carl Jung, analytic psychology. They both work with Freud and can be associated with the analytic movement. Freud felt that successful resolution of the Oedipus complex, which happens in the phallic stage, led to the development of their superego, which is the moral development. So, what we talked about was once a child a child is attracted to the parent of the opposite sex. When it's a boy, the child is a boy, it's the Oedipus complex, and when the child is a girl, it's the Electra complex. But eventually, they and they during that complex, they see the parent of the same sex as an aggressor or an enemy. But eventually, they grow to learn, like, hey, this isn't my role. Like, there's nothing that's going to happen here with me and my father and my mother. And then they start to lean towards the parent of the same sex. That super ego, that moral development starts to happen. And we know that the phallic stage is the third stage. So that's about seven. Because we have oral, anal, phallic. We have 0 to 18, 18 to 3. So phallic is about 3 to 7. So Freud felt that successful resolution of the Oedipus complex, which happens in the phallic stage, 3 to 7, led to the development of the superego, which is moral development. This is accomplished by identification with the aggressor, which would be the same parent of the same sex. So eventually you identify with the same sex parent. They're no longer the aggressor. So Oedipus, there's an attraction, libido, or sex energy to the parent of the opposite sex, making the parent of the same sex the aggressor. The child realizes that retaliation would occur if they were to act off the impulses. The child thus strives for identification with the parent of the same sex to achieve vicarious sexual satisfaction. Oedipus unknowingly killed his father and married his mother. That's why it's called the Oedipus complex. It's the most controversial aspect of Freud's theory. Um, when it occurs in females, is known as the Electra complex. The unconscious mind, so still on psychoanalysis, believe that the unconscious mind is the most important concept in Freud's theory, the unconscious. Evidence for the unconscious mind comes from hypnosis, slips of the tongue, which can also be called parapraxis, humor, and dreams. So remember that evidence for the unconscious mind comes from hypnosis, slips of the tongue, which can also be referred to as parapraxis, humor, and dreams. And Freud called these wish fulfillments. The interpretation of dreams was Freud's most influential work. Dreams have manifest and latent context. Manifest content is what the dreamer sees, and latent context is the hidden message. Dreams were the royal road to knowledge of the unconscious activities of the mind. Dream work consists of deciphering the hidden meaning of the dream so the individual can be aware of unconscious motives, impulses, desires, and conflicts. So, going back over just some information about Freud, his psychosexual stages were anal, phallic, latency, genital. We have oral 0 to 18 months, anal 18 to 3, phallic 3 to 7, latency 7 to 12, genital 12 plus. The typographic notion is the unconscious, preconscious, and conscious. The conscious mind is aware of the immediate environment. The preconscious mind is capable of bringing ideas, images, and thoughts into awareness with minimal difficulty. A few months qualify under this notion. So, anything that can be remembered, like that happened a few months ago, would be in the pre-conscious. It assesses information from the conscious and the conscious. The unconscious is material that is normally unknown or hidden, is not being able to remember, memory loss unrelated to biological factors. The unconscious serves to minimize anxiety and protect the self from severe ID or severe id or superego demands. So unconscious is material that's normally unknown or hidden. It serves to minimize anxiety and protect the self from severe id or superego demands. The hidden information in the unconscious is not being able to remember or memory loss unrelated to biological factors. The totem and the taboo and the dread of incest. The totem is an object that represents a family or group. Freud felt that even primitive people feared incestuous relationships. Psychoanalysis believed that a client who is resistant will be reluctant to bring unconscious ideas into the conscious mind. Clients who are fighting the helping process in any manner are resistant. Primal scene is a psychoanalytic concept that suggests that a young child witnesses his parents having sex or is seduced by a parent, which provides impetus for later neurosis. And remember, it for the primal scene, it could be not necessarily that um, the parents seduced them, but that the child believes that they seduced them, and they believe that they witnessed their parents having sex. The eros and the natos. So we know eros is the life instinct. So that would be love of life and self-preservation. While the natos, think Thanos, is the self-destructor and death instinct. So Thanatos equals destroyer of the world, disruptor, death or death wish or death instinct. The structural theory is the id, ego, superego. It is present at birth and never matures. It operates mainly out of awareness to satisfy instinctual needs. It's the pleasure principle, which the pleasure principle suggests that humans desire instinct gratification, such for libido, sex, or the elimination of hunger or thirst. The id is chaotic with no sense of time. The ego is reality principle. It's the executive administrator. It governs to control the impulses in the superego. It's the mediator and houses a person's identity. The superego is concerned with the ideal and personal aspirations that than what is real. So it's more concerned with what's ideal and what's your personal aspirations. Um, it's the values, morals, and ideas of parents, caretakers, and society. Moral, think moral perfection to do all things right. So, counselor educators use the seesaw or fulcrum analogy when explaining the relationship between the three. So, seesaw, up, down, up, down. Like the id and the super ego would be on opposing sides because they both can be prevalent. But what the ego does is try to balance it. So, psycho psychoanalysis uses free association. So think about counseling, like this is the oldest form of counseling. So when you think about counseling in like old movies, you have you see free association. That's when the counselor instructs the client to say whatever comes to mind, even if it seems silly or embarrassing. Nothing the client says is censored by the helper. Classical analysis have the client known as analysand lie on the couch and free associate. The analysis, the analyst, I don't know why I can't read. Classical analysts have the client lie on the couch and free associate. The analysis analyst stands out of sight. The couch enhances the free association process. So like in movies when they was like, oh, I'm going to therapy, and then they would just sit, lay on the couch and just start talking. That's free association, which is related to psychoanalysis. So we have a box of things to know, which is direct approaches. The client is asked to discuss certain material. Therapist leads client to discuss certain topics with direct suggestions, also called active therapy or active directive. And that's direct approaches to therapy. So there's an emphasis in non-directive approaches that would be more so person-centered or client-centered. There's accurate empathy. Oh, emphasized in the non. These things are going to be emphasized in non-directive approaches, such as person and client-centered. Accurate empathy. The counselor can truly understand what the client is feeling or experiencing. Reflection of emotional content when the counselor restates the client's verbalization in such a manner that the client becomes more aware of his or her emotions. And just remember that non directive equals explore with minimum direction. So there's the psychodynamic versus classical psychoanalysis. Makes use. So psychodynamic, also by Freud, makes use of psychoanalytic principle, especially the unconscious mind, but utilizes fewer sessions per week. Psychoanalysis utilizes about 3 to 5 sessions per week, 3 to 5 sessions per week for years. So the psychodynamic lessened the amount of sessions per week. The psychodynamic does not utilize the couch and is performed face to face. Because remember, in classical psychoanalysis during the free association, the counselor would stand out of view. So psychodynamic is face to face. It doesn't utilize the couch. It's a lot shorter, but it's still pretty much based off the same principle of the unconscious mind. Then we have cases associated with the psychodynamic movement are Little Hans, Anna O, and Daniel Paul Schreiber. Little Hans was used to contrast behavior therapy and support psychoanalysis. So it wanted to contrast behavior therapy and support psychoanalysis. In analysis, Little Hans was an analysis of a phobia in a 5-year-old boy by Freud. Hans' fear of going into the street and perhaps having a horse bite him were explained using psychoanalytic constructs such as the Oedipus complex and castration anxiety. So that is Little Hans, where they studied and analyzed a phobia in a 5-year-old boy, and that was done by Freud to support his psychoanalysis theory. Then you have Anna O. Anna O. The first psychoanalytic patient. Um, she was a patient of Freud's colleague Joseph Bauer Breer, Breer, your, Joseph B. Who taught, and remember, we know Joseph B. taught Freud catharsis, which is talking as a cure, i.e., therapy. So going back to Anna O. being the first psychoanalytic patient, she suffered from symptoms without an organic basis, which then was termed hysteria. So whenever you had somatic symptoms where it couldn't be supported through medically, then then you it was called hysteria. So in hypnosis, Anna O would remember painful events which she was unable to recall while awake. Talking about these traumatic events brought about relief, and this became the talking cure or catharsis. So remember that Joseph B. taught Freud catharsis, and Anna O., the first psychoanalytic patient, is how it was taught to him. Like this is how it was discovered, because during hypnosis she would remember and would feel better about all the pain that had happened to her. But if she was not under hypnosis, then she could not remember or recall. And then we have Daniel P. Schreiber, most frequently quoted, he's the most frequently quoted case in modern psychiatry. Schreiber, after spending 9 years in a mental hospital, wrote Memoirs of a Nervous Patient. Freud published psychoanalytical notes upon an autobiographical account of a case of paranoia. Schreiber's major delusion was that he would be transformed into a woman, become God's mate, and produce a healthier race. Freud felt that Schreiber might have been struggling with unconscious issues of homosexuality. And he actually he spent 9 years in the mental institute and then got out. That's crazy. And then wrote a book, but his family was rich. So that explains a lot. So moving forward to ego defense mechanisms. Ego defense mechanisms serve to distort reality and its protection from anxiety. The way that ego controls the tension created by the ego defense mechanisms are the way that ego controls the tension created by the id and superego and relieves anxiety. So they serves to protect from anxiety and relieve from anxiety. It's a distortion of reality. They are unconscious strategies. Remember, unconscious, that's why they fall under Freud. And they're unconscious strategies which distort reality and are based on self deception to protect self image. So, not only are you distorting the reality, it's based off self deception, lying to one's self. It originated in Freud's psychoanalysis, but now belongs to the study of personalities. So, defense mechanisms, we're going to go through a couple of the major ones. Defense mechanisms, we have rationalization and intellectual excuse to minimize or hurt feelings, is using justification. One, interpret his or her own thoughts in a positive or favorable way. So when you rationalize, you're interpreting your own thoughts in a positive or favorable way, such as she deserved it, or is that's favorable to you. Under the rationalization, we have sour grapes variety of rationalization, which underrates a reward. An example is I didn't really want it anyway. So there's a reward, you underrate it, you undervalue, you portray as if you undervalue it. Like, oh, that reward doesn't mean that much to me. That's the sour grapes variety of rationalization, underrating a reward. Then we have the sweet lemon variety of rationalization, which overrates a reward. It stresses it's oh an example of overrating a reward is it's stressful but I can deal with it. I enjoy the extra work to keep me busy. So that's the sweet lemon would be adding a positive perception or connotation. Then we have compensation or overcompensation. That's when an individual attempts to develop or overdevelop a positive trait to make up for a limitation or an perceived inferiority. And they do so hoping that others will focus on the positives rather than the negative factors. So, compensating or overcompensating is when an individual attempts to develop or overdevelop positive traits to make up for what they perceive as a limitation or being inferior. And they do so hoping that others will focus on the positives rather than the negative factors. We have repression. According to Freud, the most important defense mechanism is repression. It's unconscious. The person truly forgets the incident. Psychoanalytically trained counselors attempt to help the client recall the repressed memory and make it conscious so it can be dealt with, i.e., they want them to gain insight. Repression is automatic and non-voluntary response. So someone who experiences something very traumatic and they move on with their life. They're 24 and then they either go to like a psychoanalytic counselor or something happens and they connect finally like years later they can connect it to that memory because they repressed that memory. It was automatic, it was non voluntarily, they just moved on. Projection is attributing unacceptable qualities of his or her own to others. So you're projecting what you feel onto others. Projection is like looking in a mirror, but thinking you are looking out a window. So a mirror would tell you what, you see what's there, you see you, versus looking out of a window, you're so focused on other people that you can't even see yourself, or whatever your thoughts is being projected onto others. Reaction formation. A person cannot is when a person cannot accept a given impulse and behaves in the opposite manner. So reaction formation means they form a reaction that's opposite in how they feel. The reaction formed is opposite of feelings. So pretending to be nonchalant about a situation would be a reaction formation. Identification. A person identifies with a cause, successful person, or title with an unconscious hope that he or she will be perceived as successful, worthwhile, or important. It serves to lower the fear or anxiety toward that person. The person that you are attempting to identify with or as. Introjection is when a person accepts a parent, caretaker, significant other, coworker, etc., values and opinions as his or her own. So, in introjection, a sexually abused child might attempt to sexually abuse other children because that person accepted what they accepted and started to believe and adapt to what was done to them, that same value, that same way of living or being. Like, it happened to me, it must be normal type of attitude. So introjection is when a person accepts a parent, caretaker, values and opinions as his or her own. Also think about in um like scary movies, how when it's like the cuckoo for Cocoa Puff's mom, and then they have a son, and then the mom is having the son go kill people, and baby, most of the time the son has some type of intellectual issue, so they are essentially taking on the values of that parent, the mother, and committing crimes. That's through introjection. Denial, which is also known as suppression, is a conscious decision to suppress or deny feelings. Denial and suppression is from one's own doing, it's voluntary. So that's essentially refusing to think about it or deal with it. Displacement is when impulse is unleashed. I don't think it's supposed to be unleashed at a safe target. Displacement is when like anger or feelings or whatever emotion is released on a safe target. You displace it. So you kick the dog. Something happened at your job and you take it out on your wife. That's displacement. Sublimation is acting out an unconscious impulse in a socially acceptable way. So a very aggressive person pursues a career in football, boxing, etc. It's not the same as subliminal perception, which is when you perceive something unconsciously, and and this has an impact on your behavior. So subliminal perception is when you perceive something unconsciously, and this has an impact on your behavior. But sublimation, the defense mechanism, is acting out an unconscious impulse in a socially acceptable way, like football, boxing, for aggressive or angry person. Neo-Freudians emphasize interpersonal or social issues in relationships. So we have, I remember we talked about how Alfred Adler, who was individual psychotherapy, and Carl Jung, who's analytic, how they worked under Freud. So those who worked under Freud respected him, but they're like, hey, you don't have a social aspect. So they are called neo-Freudians because they emphasize interpersonal or social issues in relationships. Neo-Freudians include Alfred Adler, individual, Karen Horney, Eric Erickson, who's our moral development, Harry Stack Sullivan, who was interpersonal relations in adolescent stages. Remember, he has all those adolescent stages. And Erich Fromm. And just because I have it up, I'm going to go over the interpersonal stages for Harry S. Sullivan, who postulated the stages of infancy, early childhood, juvenile era, pre adolescence, early adolescence, post adolescence. His theory is known as the psychiatry of interpersonal relations. It focuses on social influences. So those are the Neo-Freudians: Alfred Adler, Karen Horney, Eric Erickson, Harry Sullivan, and Erich. I don't know if it's Erich or Erich from. So that's what we're where we're gonna stop, because it looks like it moves on to behaviorists, and yeah, behaviorist is up next. Let me make sure. Yeah, yeah, it's gonna we have a little information about behaviorists, and then we're gonna talk about Carl Jung, who is a neo-Freudian.